So my presentation is called rangatiratanga, and it's about the journey from past leader to past mentor. So I think in some other countries, past might be known as supplemental instruction, or you might have other ways of describing it, but past at Victoria stands for peer-assisted study support. And I'll explain it a little bit more, but in a few slides, but basically it's when second-year students who have done particularly well in a subject take a group of first-year students in that same subject, and they lead them in active learning activities to go through that subject. And it's based around active learning and working as a group, not as an additional tutorial. So a little note about my presentation title, Ka'ata Rangatiratanga. This is one of the core Māori values that I'm going to talk about. Rangatira, the core or the root word in that word, actually means chief, and tanga is the suffix that makes it an abstract noun. So basically, rangatiratanga is chieftainship, and it's used in the Treaty of Waitangi to talk about sovereignty, but it's also used in education to talk about leadership. Ka'ata is the process of being deliberate. So basically the title is deliberate and considered leadership. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So first of all, past mentors at Victoria. So the presentation is about the leadership journey, and basically what happened last year in 2015 is for the first time we started a layer of mentoring in the PASS program. So PASS had been running for about 15 years, and then last year we decided to add another layer of mentoring. So why did we do that? First of all, we wanted to provide further leadership opportunities for our students, and this is reflected in Skillicky and Caney's findings. They did a study. They're two learning advisors from University of Tasmania, and they looked into their PASS program, and they found that having a mentorship layer adds an additional layer of leadership opportunity. So that was one motivation. We also wanted to bridge the gap between PASS leader and tutor and other positions in the university. Ideally, we'd love to see a university that which has tutors who have all been PASS leaders, because that would mean our tutors were well versed in active learning, engaging a group, facilitating, rather than just being another lecturer. So that's kind of our ideal. And we also had, just to be honest, some amazing leaders in 2014. We weren't quite ready to let them go, so we dreamed up the mentor role so that we could keep hold of them as well. So the way we did that is we recruited from the 2014 PASS leader cohort, and applicants were required to complete a short reflective application form. We did a small training session with them once we had gathered the 12 mentors, and we talked about how the role would look, how they wanted to observe their leaders, how they planned to communicate that feedback to their leaders. But the PASS philosophy of active learning really guided us through this entire process. By that I mean we engaged in discussion with the mentors about how they saw the role, how they envisaged it might look like for them, rather than prescribing what we thought the role should be. So it was really evolving. And from the 12 mentors last year, I think they all had very individual experiences. So they really had the opportunity to make the mentor role their own. So we had 100 PASS groups last year and 85 leaders. For those 85 leaders, we had 12 mentors, and each of the mentors were from various disciplines, and they were responsible for overseeing 4 to 9 mentees each. And it really just depended on schedules as to how many they actually were responsible for mentoring. So in terms of their role, So the mentors participated in the recruitment process of the 2015 leaders. They observed their mentees in action. After those observations, they gave them both verbal and written feedback. And then we also used the mentors to plan and deliver the end of trimester debrief that we usually have with our leaders. So in the past, we've always done a debrief, and Deborah and myself, Deborah is the coordinator of the PASS program at Victoria. So Deborah and myself have usually delivered this debrief in the past, and this year we got the mentors to be involved in that as well. So just a little bit about this presentation. I originally presented this with 4 of the mentors that were a mentor in 2015. And I presented that at the 3rd National Peer Learning Forum in New Zealand. So some of the New Zealand colleagues in this presentation, attending this presentation, may have seen the earlier version of this presentation. So unfortunately, I couldn't have the 4 mentors who presented with me in my room. They probably wouldn't all fit in my office. So I'm presenting on behalf of them. So the first person is Haley. This is Haley in the orange dress, and she was one of our mentors. In the presentation that we delivered together in June, Haley was the first person up, and she talked about what mentoring looked like for her. So she describes that she had 7 leaders, and they were each from different subject areas. Haley found that really interesting because she was a past leader for international relations and geography, and she had leaders from all over. So she had laws leaders and English leaders and history leaders. So she really got to see leaders from all over the curriculums and the different faculties. What she did was she emailed them weekly reports, and she offered feedback on those weekly reports. She also observed the leaders twice throughout the trimester. So first in the beginning, just to see how the leaders were doing, and then a second observation near the end of the trimester to talk about their development. She was really good at bringing the leaders together, and she managed to organize a mid-trimester meetup. And she's also really interested in pedagogy, and so she shared useful readings with her leaders on teaching and learning. In her presentation, she noted that the core values of PASS, that students are not empty vessels to be filled, but rather have much of their own to offer. So when she talked about that, she mentioned that as a mentor, she was given a lot of freedom to shape her role and to suit her own skills. And this allowed her to, I guess, address the particular needs of the mentees within her group. An interesting note about Haley is that apart from all of these opportunities that she had as a mentor to give feedback, to observe, to send useful readings, she was also asked to be a reference for one of her leaders. One of her leaders applied to be an RA in a hall of residence, and the leader put Haley on her CV as a reference. So Haley ended up having the opportunity as a mentor to give verbal feedback on one of her leaders in a professional way. So above and beyond the feedback, the observations, the organization and facilitating of a group, Haley had the really great opportunity to provide a professional reference, and she found that really useful because that will be great management experience for her work careers as well. So the next student mentor was Quinton. He didn't actually send me a photo of himself before I needed to present the slides, and so I promised him that I would just show a photo of him on the webcam. So this is Quinton, and he is a psychology student. He was another mentor, and when we presented in June, Quentin talked about the transition from past leader to mentor. So the first thing he talked about is that on the surface, superficially, the roles seem quite different. The mentor role has a lot more administration because they have to keep track of their mentees' reports. They have to do a lot more emailing. They really have to be aware of their mentees' timetables. So it's a lot more administrative. But he talked about at the core, the mentor is simply a slight extension of the leader because it's just developing those skills of facilitation, bringing a group together, and also the fact that as a past leader, you should be able to facilitate any past group, no matter if it's a discipline or course that you've done in the past. That was the same philosophy Quentin saw as a mentor, because he believed that he should be able to mentor anyone, not just a psychology leader. So he talked about how superficially they seem quite different, but actually at the core they're quite similar in the core ideas of facilitation and active learning. He also talked about how doing the observations as a mentor actually provided mentors the opportunity to reflect on their own performance as a leader. So he gave the example of observing one of his leaders' sessions and noticing that the table setting, the way the tables had been set up in the room, weren't facilitating a very communicative, engaged session. And that made him reflect on his own experience as a leader the year before. And even though Deborah and I talk about table placement and how that can really affect a classroom environment and a meeting environment, it wasn't until he had the opportunity to be a mentor and actually be outside of that session looking in that he was able to reflect on what we had been going on about, and how table settings actually do matter a lot. So then he was able to not only reflect on kind of his not shortcomings, but his missed opportunity to notice that as a leader. He was also able to feed that back to his leader when he gave his feedback. And then finally, in terms of progression and generalization, he talked about progression in terms of having more opportunity to give feedback, more opportunity to be in a teaching and learning role. And so it allowed him as a mentor to kind of decide whether he wanted to go further down the track of teaching and learning, whether he wanted to become a teacher, whether he wanted to maybe pursue a tutoring role. And he also realized that the skills that he was learning were generalizable. So again, the core facilitation, the fact that he could mentor anyone, not just a psychology student, allowed him to realize the general skills that he was learning. Finally, he questioned whether mentoring was the final step. So he came up with the idea that for lots of leaders, it's actually for lots of mentors, it's a bi-directional transition, because a lot of mentors, once they got into the class again and they were observing their leaders, they actually felt like they were missing out and they wanted to get back into the action. I have a quote from another leader. She didn't present with us, but she did a reflection. And she said that I'm much more comfortable and find much more enjoyment being in the heat of action as a leader. And since my dedication corresponds largely with my passion for something, I feel as though I made a much better past leader than a mentor. So this was from Ziming, and she was reflecting on the fact that she actually preferred being a leader because she was able to be in the action and facilitating, whereas the mentor was kind of a bit more hands-off, but still quite facilitatory. So what Quentin thinks is maybe that there's a bidirectional transition, and that from leader then you become a mentor, but then after having the opportunity to be a mentor, you actually might go back to being a leader. And that did happen last year, actually. After the first trimester, some of the mentors requested to be leaders again, and some of them did. But moving forward, I think Quentin also sees that from a mentor, there's opportunity to go into tutoring, to go into the workforce, and also that mentoring teaches you a lot about life skills, probably the most important one, communication. So that leads us to kind of the first part of this presentation, which is about the transferable skills that the mentors believed that they acquired last year in the program. So this is our third mentor. This is Zoe, and she is an aspiring academic. She is studying anthropology, and I think the photo that she sent me really depicts her goals, because this is her standing in front of Harvard. So Zoe talked about the 4 key transferable skills that she thinks she gained from mentoring. And she thinks these will be useful for her future career. So the first one was leadership and empowerment. When Zoe spoke in July, or June rather, she was a self-confessed shy person. She said that she's always been quite shy, but going through the process of first being a leader and then being a mentor really gave her confidence, and that confidence spread throughout her own academic studies as well. She's been doing an summer internship over the summer in New Zealand here, and it's also opened up a lot of opportunities for her within the university. And she believes she may not have had the confidence to pursue those opportunities if she hadn't had that confidence built through her journey from leader to mentor. She also talks about interdisciplinary skills, and how the fact that she was a mentor to people who are studying law, or for people who are studying architecture or English. As an anthropology major, she had to disassociate herself from giving core content feedback, and she really therefore had to focus on critically analyzing the leader's performance in terms of how well they communicate, how well they facilitate a group, how well they involve every person in the session. And so she thinks that having these interdisciplinary skills, being able to communicate and give feedback to a English major and architecture major, she saw that really valuable for her future profession, where she'll have to also engage with people from other faculties, people from other parts of the university as an academic. So she thought that those interdisciplinary skills would be really useful for her future as well. The third one, administration skills. This was actually one of the biggest parts of the role for the mentors, I think. And I don't know if they anticipated how much of a learning curve it would be. Zoe said in her presentation that my email inbox got a serious workout, and I am now finally attuned to the art of email composition. Zoe, as well as the other mentors, had to manage, as I said earlier, up to 7 or 8 mentees. And so that's at least 8 emails additionally coming to you once a week, sending Zoe a report. But if any of those leaders had issues or questions, that might have been 2 or 3 emails from each leader every week. And so Zoe really got a crash course in how to manage that type of email management. And I had another quote from another mentor who wasn't able to present in June. And he sent Deborah and I an email, and he just said, the experience of being a past mentor throughout the trimester was an eye-opener into just how extraordinary the program is. needless to say, my respect for both you and Deborah has rocketed upwards, as I remember you both answered loads of emails last year, making sure we stayed on track. So this is Angus reflecting on how much email contact he had had as a leader from Deborah and I the year before, and now he's, kind of on the other side in his mentor role, realizing how much email contact is involved. So that administration skills point, that third point from Zoe, I think was one of the biggest transferable skills that the mentors got. And for some of the mentors, they saw that as a positive. They thought, yeah, this is great. This is really useful for my future career. For other mentors, I think they didn't see it so much as a positive. One of the mentors, Ziming, actually mentioned that had she known how administration heavy the role would have been, she may not have applied. Ziming is the one who reflected that she feels she was actually a better leader than mentor because she likes being in the thick of things. So I think for us moving forward, with our training of mentors this year, we're really going to try and focus on that part of administration skills and make that as seamless for our mentors as possible. One note I want to make is that in trimester 2, we actually used OneNote, which is a Microsoft application, and it just meant that students didn't have to email. They were kind of uploading all of their communication to students onto this same platform, which is OneNote. And so the final transferable skill that Zoe saw from being a mentor was being able to build a sense of community. She saw the mentor position as an opportunity to build connections, not only with students and her peers, but also with the university. As I said earlier, Zoe is an aspiring academic, and so as a third-year student, or fourth year now, she's trying to make as many inroads into the university as possible, so that when she goes to apply for a tutor role or to do postgraduate study or to find a supervisor, if she ends up doing her PhD here at Victoria, she's got connections throughout the university, and I think she really saw the mentor program to be complementary to also just being a good student in anthropology, and so she saw that as another way of kind of getting into the university and staying connected. So those were the 4 transferable skills that Zoe reflected on and that she saw were the most important for her that she gained from being a mentor last year. So when I sent in my proposal for this presentation, I was asked how I was going to engage participants, and I said that I would do some reflection questions and that I would have a discussion at the end. So this is kind of the halfway point in the presentation, and these are just some reflection questions that I came up with that I thought might be useful to think about transferable skills in your own peer learning programs in your own institutions. I'm not quite sure how to facilitate this, whether people actually want to type something and say what they're thinking, or if you just want to take a moment and reflect. I guess I'll just read them out and give you a moment to think about them. So the first one is what types of transferable skills do you think the leaders in your peer learning programs acquire? And do they relate to what we have reported, or more accurately, what Zoe reported, administration, building a community, or are there others that you think your leaders are gaining? The other one is, do you think your leaders are aware of the transferable skills they're acquiring? What methods do you use to encourage self-reflection? And then the third one is reference back to that paper I talked about at the beginning, Skillicky and Kenny from University of Tasmania. In that same paper, they present 12 aspects of leadership for past leaders and mentors. So they believe these 12 aspects are parts of leadership that leaders gain from being involved in PASS. And I'm just wondering, can you think of examples of these types of aspects in your current peer learning program? And are there possibly any opportunities for you to develop any of these aspects further? So mull over that. I'm going to have a drink of water. I can see that multiple attendees are typing, so that's good. Okay, interesting. So I guess everyone can see that, but I'll just reiterate what Michael's written. That at his institution, they were recently asked to report the transferable skills that their student employees gain, and that he surveyed the employees, and the number one answer was communication, with the leadership a close second. Okay, and in Vancouver, tutors are given reflection questions and interview tutors mid-year. Okay. One thing I thought might be interesting to note about Victoria and that type of self-reflection is that we also have a program here called Victoria Plus. And this isn't run by student learning, this is run in a different department. But basically it's a program that students get involved in, and they need to do a certain amount of community hours, community volunteering, and they also need to attend a certain amount of workshops within the university. But they get points, and once they get the required amount of points, they can get this award. It's actually quite prestigious. It goes on their transcript, and the award is presented by our Vice Chancellor. So it's quite a big undertaking, and it's very valued by employers. But students can get points for being past leaders, and one of the things that's required in the Victoria Plus program is for students to fill out an e-portfolio. So they're required not only within our past program to self-reflect, but also if they're working towards a Victoria Plus award, they do even more self-reflection within that e-portfolio. Okay, so I'm just keeping up with what everyone's saying. Right, so David from the UK, hi David, is talking about collaboration, developing co-creation, and I think that's a really good point, and maybe something that possibly is missing in our past structure. I mean, collaborating with my mentors this year was a good opportunity, but one thing we have talked about is past mentors meeting up more, and also past leaders being able to observe other leader sessions as well. So that's a bit of collaboration. Yeah, reflection, career center. So that's a really good point that Michael's made there about working with the careers center and developing skills on how to actually advertise them. That's quite true, because although Zoe was able to articulate the transferable skills that she learned from being a mentor, that doesn't necessarily mean she knows how to advertise those skills and put that onto a CV. So now I'm looking at Zoe. Gain credits. Oh, wow. So the PAL leaders at the end of the year need to write a 1,500 reflective piece with brief reference to peer learning models. Zoe, can you comment on the PAL leaders, I guess, perception of that? Like, do they look forward to that? Do they see it as an additional burden, or what's their take on being required to do that final piece? I'm just curious. Okay, I can see that Carol from Otago is typing. Carol is one of our colleagues who also runs and coordinates the PASS program at the University of Otago. And at Otago, they also have a mentorship layer. Just so no one gets worried, we're pretty much at the halfway point, and this was where I was planning to have the reflection. So we're on track, and I guess maybe just waiting a couple more minutes until these multiple attendees have written what they're writing. Okay. So Carol's saying that they have similar results at Otago for their mentors and transferable skills. They've focused on the development of skills and attributes, right, linked to the Otago graduate attributes profile. They encourage reflective practice, have workshops on how to recognize and sell these skills in CVs, and conduct exit interviews with mentors to evaluate skill development. Yeah, that's a really good point about those exit interviews. Some of the things that I've been reading from today, I guess we could say that they're exit interviews. They're just what we asked our mentors. We asked our mentors to write do's and don'ts. So I guess that was a kind of self-reflection there on their role. And those comments that I read from Ziming about wanting to be a leader rather than the mentor, that came from that do's and don'ts reflection at the end of the trimester. Okay, so I'm just seeing David's comment here from the UK, and he's asking about what motivates past leaders. So he's asking, do we pay them? Yep, we do pay them. The leaders are paid from the faculty. So a psychology leader is paid from the faculty of psychology. Some give them course credit, some have to rely on them getting the softer benefit of transferable skills. So the more we can make them aware that they have actually gained this, the better. Yeah, I agree, absolutely. I think we're quite lucky at Victoria because PASS has been going for so long now that it's actually gained quite a good reputation. It's particularly successful and even competitive to get into a group for law. I guess that's because at our university, first year law is basically you make it or you don't, and so it's quite competitive to be successful in first year law. So every year when we have the online sign-ups, the law students crash our website trying to get into a PASS group for a law PASS group. So we do pay our leaders, but I think on top of that, we've been able to build the program so that it's seen by first year students as really important, an extra part of their university timetable. It's not a tutorial, it's not a lecture, but I think we've managed to make it seem like an additional thing that's not just on offer, but that's also really, really good. So I think we've been able to build the quality and therefore the reputation. But I definitely agree with David's comment about the more we can make our leaders aware of what they're gaining, the better. Okay, cool. I'm just reading from Fiona that at Victoria and Melbourne, their student mentors reflect in a mentor blog space. I like that idea, but she's been disappointed at a couple of job interviews where we were looking at employing a graduate who had been a mentor and their oral articulation of skills was poor. Okay, that's an interesting concept. I actually hadn't thought about that part of the skill of actually having to verbalize. It's one thing writing a self-reflection and writing about what they've learned, but it's definitely another thing, as you point out, Fiona, of actually verbalizing what they've learned and what they can do for the company that they're applying for. Okay, so I guess this is Zoe referring back to my question about that 1,500 word piece that the PAL leaders need to complete. And she's saying that at the beginning, when they sign up, they're told that that piece is a requirement. There's always a reluctance for additional work, but they can use information from their monthly submissions to help them out. Okay, that's nice. So it's scaffolded and they can pull things from what they do in their reports throughout and put that in the final piece. Each year, a couple of students don't feel they have the time. It's very rare. And these few can be removed from the module, but obviously they don't get the credits. Okay, so I'm assuming that for Zoe, you get credits as a PAL leader and rather than being paid. Dawn Marsh. That's where I'd like Deborah to answer that question. I don't actually remember. Deborah, who pays our mentors? Thank goodness you're here, Deborah. Okay, great. So that's how we were able to build in that layer. It's paid by student learning. Okay, so thanks for your contributions to that. That's oh, and they're also paid. Interesting. Okay, so the PAL leaders get credits and they're also paid. So I think that thank you for taking the time to type those things. I really liked the point about collaboration and also about the importance of leaders not only writing about their transferable skills, but also having the opportunity to speak about them. One thing I'll say just quickly, one thing that we have done in the past in our leader debrief at the end of the trimester is we've done some job interview role plays where we've got them to answer experiential questions, those types of questions where tell me about a time when you exhibited a leadership quality, tell me about a time when you've had to deal with a difficult or ethical situation. And that's been somewhat successful, but we haven't given much time to it, maybe only 10 or 15 minutes. So that's maybe something in light of, I think, Fiona's comment about the poor ability of verbalizing those skills that maybe we could look into developing further. So I am going to move on just because I'm aware of time. And the second part of this presentation is something that I'm really excited about sharing. So we've talked about transferable skills. The other thing, linking back to the title of this presentation in reference to the rangatiratanga, is this idea of core Māori values. So for our international colleagues, Māori are the Indigenous people, the tangata whenua of New Zealand. And at Victoria University, we have a program called Te Putahi Atawhai, and they're the Centre for Māori and Pacifica Success. So they run a leadership mentoring program where they recruit mentors to work particularly with Māori and Pacifica students to help with their success and retention. So this table, I suppose, comes originally from Te Putahi Atawhai, and these values, rangatiratanga, manakitanga, kotahitanga, whakamana, whakanui, ako, and whanaungatanga, these values are the pillars of the Te Putahi Atawhai's philosophy. As I mentioned earlier, rangatiratanga is also linked to the Treaty of Waitangi in terms of sovereignty of the tangata whenua of New Zealand. And the value of ako in particular is also quite closely linked with the New Zealand curriculum. So although these values come from Te Pūtahi Atawhai, they're also present in other parts of New Zealand society. So what I want to talk about is past leaders and past mentors' experience with these values. So originally, the very first time that a past leader sees these values is either in our past leader training or in our core leader training. So the reference that I have at the top there, or at the bottom as well, is in reference to a paper that Deborah wrote in collaboration with colleagues at Te Pūtahi Atawhai, and they used these core Māori values to, they brought together the leaders from TPA in the mentoring program and the past leaders, and they brought them together as a collaboration to do core leader training, whether you're a past leader or a mentor at TPA. So they brought it together and collaborated, and together they used these core Māori values to help leaders think about leadership and how they could incorporate these values. So the first time a past leader sees these values, engages with these values, is either in our in-house past leader training, or if they attend the wider core leader training. We use those values. Oh, sorry. I'll just go back and really quickly mention what they mean. So rangatiratanga, as I talked about, leadership, weaving the group together. Manakitanga is about self-esteem, acting as a role model. In other contexts, it's also used as hospitality, making people feel welcome. Kotahitanga is about unity. The word tahi in the middle there means one. So it's bringing a shared sense of purpose together. Whakamana is showing respect, praise, positive feedback. Whakanui is about celebrating each other's success and building on members' strengths. Ako is a really core concept in New Zealand education, and it really emphasizes the core philosophy of learning and teaching being reciprocal. The past leader is a learner as well. The attendees to the past group are teachers as well. Same with the mentors and the leaders. The mentors learn from the leaders and the leaders learn from the mentors. So it's that reciprocal learning philosophy. And finally, whanaungatanga, whānau, that first word is family. So it's about bringing the group together and believing that the group is more important than the leader. So those are the meanings. And so what I want to talk about is the process or the journey of how a past leader encounters these core values. So this first example is the first time that they might be using the core value. So they've learned it in leader training, and now these are excerpts from their weekly reports. So they've sent their weekly report in to their mentor and to Deborah and myself. And on the left, you can see they reflect on what they did, what went well, and what to improve. So the student on the yellow piece of paper has said that their rangatiratanga went well. It's kind of surface level. It's a bit maybe token, but at least they're thinking about the value and they're thinking about, okay, maybe I led the group well today, or we want to know a little bit more about how this went well, but at least they're incorporating the value into their report. On the right-hand side, you can see a student reflecting on how their group agreed that learning something and then teaching it to someone else is really helpful in reinforcing learning, and they've referred back to the idea of ako. So this is a bit more in-depth, and they're actually giving quite a concrete example of how ako was seen in their past group that week. This is the fourth mentor that presented with me in June. This is Philida, and she's a chemistry major. She became very interested in these core Māori values, and she used them a lot as a mentor. She told me when we were talking about this presentation that although she first encountered the core Māori values in the core leader training with Dana and Deborah, it wasn't until she became a mentor that she actually could see how integrated they were and how she could actually use the core values to reflect and also as a core framework to give her leaders feedback. So what Philida did, I'm just going to go through a couple of examples of how she used them in her mentoring. So just going back, Philida got quite sick and she wasn't able to do 2 observations of her leaders. And so she came up with the idea that she would actually sorry, I keep switching back, but she would send this table to her leaders, and she would get them to self-reflect on how the values had, how they had been put into action in their own personal past sessions. So here it's a lot of writing, but these are just two examples. Within each box, it's the two different leaders' reflections that they sent back to Phillida. So I really like how the second box in Whanonatanga, one leader is talking about creating a sense of family through familiarity and the smallness of the group. I use their names regularly, and they also know my name. So from that first example that we saw where the leader is just using rangatiratanga, now they're actually really engaging with the values and thinking about how they're embodying them in their own practice. And then the other one I liked was in reference to whakanui. The leader allowed students to work on their own to explore their ideas before working in pairs and groups to allow the students' strengths to be shared amongst others. So you can see that these are kind of universal best practice teaching, facilitating skills, but the leaders are using the values to focus on key aspects of facilitation and using them to reflect. So this is quite small, but just another example of Phillida using the core values. So on the left, you can see what her leader sent to her, what we did, what went well. And then on the right, you can see Phillida's response. So this is an example of when Phillida actually observed the leader, and she's now giving her that written feedback that we talked about. So Phillida says, there was a moment at the end where Solomon asked a question to you, but before you even had to respond, a couple of the other students jumped in to answer. Such a great example of ACO. I think this is a really great reflection of how far your past group has come. They're so comfortable talking with each other and answering questions. So now Phillida is using the core value of ACO to actually feed back to her leader and give her specific examples of how that leader actually embodied and demonstrated ACO. I might skip that one just for time. It's just another example of Phillida using the core values to give feedback. So this part is actually what Phillida presented in June. So she thought that there were four key Māori values from her mentor perspective that she used from her role as a mentor. The first one was kotahitanga, and she said that overseeing 9 past leaders, all from different disciplines, she was there to create a strong and supportive learning community. So leaning on the value of kotahitanga reminded her that she needed to create that sense of community, even though none of her leaders studied chemistry like herself, and they all came from different disciplines. She also thought that Whanonatanga was quite important. She thought about the idea of organizing meetups to discuss their sessions and sharing their ideas across emails. So when we started to use OneNote, it enabled us possibly to even start creating like an online Whanonatanga, because the leaders were able to see the reports that they had written to Phillida. So all of Phillida's leaders could see what the other leaders were doing. And so that also builds that community. She thought whakanui was really important. She said that when she did observations, she used the positives as a basis for feedback. And isn't this great? This is just best practice. And she reiterated to them that what they've done well, and then she used that as a framework for where to improve. So it's kind of like what teachers always talk about, giving the compliment sandwich. Say what they did well first, and then give a little, but maybe you should try this. But then, hey, let's just remember that you also did this really well. So I just see a question from Michael, and I'm going to get to that about a concern of cultural appropriation. But I'll just say one more thing from Phillida. The last one was Ako. So she thought that the teaching and learning philosophy really helped her being a mentor. She said that the mentor role has really reiterated ACO for me. Although I'm mentoring, the experience has taught me a lot, and it's reiterated the core facilitation and communication skills are the most important. So that's from the mentor perspective. So I think from there I have a couple of final points. The first one is, and I'm hoping that this will address Michael's question about cultural appropriation. So I think what I found going back through the different ways that leaders and mentors engage with the values is that although they're first presented at past leader training, it's through actually consistent embedding, engaging in them, reflecting on them, using them as self-reflection as a leader, and using them as a framework for feedback as a mentor. Through those different steps, I think it becomes important and intrinsic to the role at all levels of leadership. I have a quote just from the paper that Deborah wrote, if I can find it. And she talks about at the end when they chose, in the collaborative project, when Deborah and Dana collaborated between Student Learning and Te Pātahi Ātawhai to do the core leader training. They say in their paper that through highlighting the cross-cultural universality of these Māori values, we seek to empower student leaders with the confidence in community building to support their peers' retention and success. So I think it's never about cultural appropriation, but more so using the core Māori values to respect that Māori is the Indigenous people of New Zealand, and then also to highlight that the values within the core Māori values are cross-culturally universal. Reciprocal learning, building a community, celebrating people's successes. I think those are really universal core values that hopefully everyone can, I guess, strive to have in their peer leadership programs. And I think having the Māori words attached to them is just another way of getting people to think about it.